Luckily. Yes, and we are live. We're back again with another episode of Eavesdrop. For everybody who is hopping in, filling in, boom. Can you like the video, share the video, comment? We going live for a few, just to do a little bit of house cleaning before we go ahead and get started. If you are going to call in, if we accept those, because I have to find the link, because unfortunately we had some technical difficulties regarding the technologies. So we do apologize. As you see, it's 7:23, and I like being on time. But with that being said, we're going to talk about today the decaying of America, Phony coalitions, fam. You know, so we are here with the Black Anglo, Inquisitive Q, and Quan Poet.
Yo.
Back here on the ones and twos. So after we get through, if you are interested in calling in, just go ahead and leave that in the comments. We're going to have a comment period afterwards. So just bear with us while we're, going through the articles, going through the information and everything like that, because we don't necessarily want to just be talking out the side of our necks. But with that being said,
wait a minute. Are you saying we don't want to be Fraud Squad?
No, we don't want to be Fraud Squad.
Oh, okay.
We don't want to be Fraud Squad. They mad right now.
Especially Jimmy Dore.
They are, unfortunately, for the things that what they said to do. That was their standard.
You know what? You about to get in trouble like a vet for having receipts.
Nah,
you can't have receipts, bro. People don't like that.
Nah, man. What we gonna do? We gonna get up in this motherfucker.
Okay.
And the first thing we gonna do, we gonna pop off, because again, tonight is talking about the mayhem of 2021. We've started off very great, very reminiscent of 2020. I love it. I've been talking about getting my society that I need to cultivate. So we're going to get there.
My society I need to cultivate.
Because I need people to understand the truth. You know what I'm saying?
That's shit right there.
I don't really care, man. Look, if people want to be fake, if people want to believe in lies, I'm just going to wait for the truth to deliver thee unto you. Because guess what? It is here. Because you want to know what? The first conversation we having, and I didn't get a chance to download the article from The Guardian as it relates to how white supremacy has infiltrated our military, our FBI, our CIA, our elected offices, whether they be senators, House of Representatives, mayors, local officials. It came out some of the raiders or hold on, protesters.
No, or insurrectionists.
Nah, they ain't even trying to take it. They trying to,
they backtracking?
Yeah. The white lady, they out here, Sandra Bland in there. Yeah.
Say her name.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Failed coalition.
I did not know that.
Failed coalition.
So they trying to Me Too Sandra Bland. Because Me Too was started by a black woman 10 years before it got popular.
This is true. They trying to do that, but also just scrape the whole thing. Because guess what? Unfortunately, black women have paved the way to be exploited as it relates to their social capital. Because I don't necessarily think it's appropriate, but in the same case with this powerhood, I was about to say this nigga here. I just told this nigga.
It's okay. It's okay. It's for you beautiful people. The things we sacrifice for you all. Not only do we sacrifice our Saturdays, we also sacrifice our sanity Because, wait a minute. We did. Like, did you see Lindsey Graham get yelled at? Why did you vote for Trump? Did you see my man Mitt Romney get pulled up on?
I love it though.
You about to, you know, they did the Kanye. They told him he was the abomination to abomination. That's a hell of a way to start the conversation. I'm telling you. No publishing, please. No publishing, please.
Hey, he said that too.
Exactly. That's funny.
Hey, that's funny as shit. All right, no, look. Go ahead. Happy New Year to everybody, man. We just coming back and fucking around here. Because you said all that. You still publishing. Please. They will sue our ass.
No! I don't want to be sued, Kanye. I don't want to be a slave. You didn't do that term, so I'm just trying to follow your example.
But man, no, look, we saw the insurrection. We saw the civil unrest. I think a lot of people came into it and were very shocked, to say the least. A lot of people were upset. A lot of people condemned and boxed it into Donald Trump. And what I'll say is, you know, because we're not going to touch on the article on this one, we saw what happened. You know, the videos in which came out, we saw police officers, we saw, you know, quote unquote, the judicial branch allow for this to happen. And as we know, you know, races in America are typically very straightforward and are very follow through. So we've had this rhetoric for about the last 3, 4, 5 to 6 months, especially after the election and after the votes came in, Donald Trump, you know, leveraging himself as political capital to incite this. But also, what I think people are missing in a lot of ways is that it doesn't take Donald Trump to incite this, because this existed far before Donald Trump. Donald Trump just gave it a new flair, to say the least. Because when we talk about the GOP, when we talk about the Proud Boys, when we talk about MAGA, when we talk about everything, when it comes down to a breach of a building where we witness video of people breaking down windows. And again, for everybody in context, if you're not in DC, these are buildings that even if you have ID, you go through several checkpoints.
Before you even get to the door to get into the building, there's another kiosk outside of it. And before you even get there, there's like 3 to 4 people at the barricades, where even the representatives gotta wait for them to be going with the entourage, going enforce with the finger on the side. It's like when you go to the Capitol, it ain't easy.
It ain't easy.
It makes you nervous.
And so when I don't know about everybody else in the room, which we're going to get around about to, is that when I see that, I see collusion. I see phony coalitions, because one thing that I want to talk about tonight is we have a president in Joe Biden. We have, you know, Donald Trump coming out. We have Mike Pence, quote unquote, Betsy DeVos, quote unquote, trying to distance themselves from the crazy madness that is Donald Trump. But with that being said, is we've had this again before Donald Trump. And so this urge and willingness to work across the aisle, which is the first phony coalition that we'll kind of get into today, is what does this mean for after? What does this mean working across the aisle in terms of coming up with these policies that are quote unquote middle of the road, quote unquote, we are conservative, centrist, center left, center right, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders type candidates who don't want to address what is race, what is the protest to Reconstruction, because I find it very ironic that reparations is being pushed into the forefront. The economic collapse with the wealth calcification on top of that, and all of those things in combination, I find it interesting that we see a moment in American history that is literally a direct repeat of what was done to remove us from receiving that. And so what I'll do is, because I feel like it's just so much that I have to get around my head, I'll just go around to kind of see. I want to hear your thoughts on everything that happened as it relates to the Capitol building being breached, raided. You know, some people have quote unquote been reached out to by the FBI. Some people have been arrested. And so just as it relates to America, its history, where we are now, what do you make of the events that happened this week? Do you think Black people, that this is our fight? Of course, I say no. But do you think it's our fight? Do you think we should intervene, or do you think we should let, the quote unquote descendants of slavers and slave owners reconcile with the consolation prize or the agreement that was made during Reconstruction as it spears its head again when we see a failed coup?
It's a pretty loaded question, so I'll begin here, especially with the Reconstruction. More importantly, the fall of the Confederacy. What you see with Donald Trump is a character that feeds into the lost cause myth, and that the myth that the South was deprived of economic enfranchisement because the North mechanized and forgot its way and its duty to the common man. And so Trump was able to appeal to the common man by saying these people, these city elites, these liberal elites, and they're far left after is keeping us from our. And so Trump was able to appeal to them. So they're keeping us from our better selves. And in saying that they were keeping them from our better selves, he created a us versus them, where the rural urban divide became a way he could play for political clout and political economic stability, for political and economic force, so that he can use his celebrity on Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms to circumvent traditional media platforms like Fox, CNN, no matter the cable outlet or international outlet. But as far as Reconstruction in my mind, especially in hindsight, is the reconciliation of America. Because what has to be reconciled in America is the divide between the exploitation of poor whites and the exploitation of ADOS or Black. Let's talk about the timeline. ADOS, descendants of slavery, of chattel slavery, and the economic scale and how that was skewed. Because we have to remember, in the North, people were anti-slavery, but they were not pro-Black. They were anti-slavery because you had a population that was being exploited, so it suppressed the wages of the people, or white people at this point in time. I would say WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, who were competing for wage jobs, as the North mechanized and industrialized and the South did not. I say all that to say is that you have this myth of the North owing the South something. Mm-hmm. And Trump is able to feed into that myth. He was able to tap into the disenfranchisement that people feel when jobs were taken from the Midwest. Like manufacturing was Detroit. As you see with electronic vehicles were no longer were also displaced jobs. So my point is that these insurrectionists, as they have been labeled by the left, shows that when economic straits happen in America or economic tough times happen, so does violence. And so that there needs to be constraints on capital and how capital is marketing itself as being valuable to the larger demographic. There needs to be some actual commitment to value versus stock price, because we can see with the Fed that assets in the stock price, I'm not, just the disclaimer, I don't invest, I don't have any stock. I am saying that the inflation of stock prices lead to the speculation that we saw in 1929, or at least scares me as we go to longer food lines by high stock prices.
Okay.
No, it's not Black people's fight, because we can't fight institutions.
This is true indeed. Quan, what's your take?
So I definitely believe it's not our fight. We need to sort of stay on the sidelines of this. But there are some takeaways that I think us as Black people need to observe. And for me, I'm more so looking at the mechanism of how those people were accepted for what they did and they were heard, because there was no violence that was met with that whole exchange. They were able to come in, they were able to voice whatever they wanted to voice, they were able to do whatever they wanted to do, and they were able to do those things without any recourse in one of the most secure places in the world. And what that signaled to me was, my God, they actually allow their poor to have a say-so. Even if it's just for show, they actually get to participate in community. And it's like, when I look at us, we don't necessarily operate in that same way, because we don't let anyone that does not meet certain requirements to even participate in certain Black spaces. And it's like, yo, to see them people literally drive up and do what they wanted to do at the behest of so many of those elite white people in Washington, it's like, whoa, what if we allowed that type of autonomy for our poor people in our Black communities?
Let me say this before we move on to the next segment.
I don't see it as a color thing.
I see it as a color thing in a different way.
As far as a law enforcement, but as far as Trumpism is
No, Trumpism isn't a color thing. Law enforcement, yes. But as it pertains to people being able to empower their poor, what I will say is, as you know very well, part of what I do and part of the way I speak is around empowering, quote unquote, the streets, which is the poor when it comes to the, and I wouldn't even say the poor when it comes to the AOS community. I would say the more impoverished but savvy, because they have an understanding that I don't think a lot of people or even themselves sometimes understand as it relates to politics. But what a lot of people miss in this whole ordeal is that when we come down to, again, I wish I had the article, I'll leave it in the comment and a link below in the thread, is when we talk about the infiltration of a lot of different institutions, it's not an empowerment of the poor as so much as it is working with the poor as a whole, understanding the poor is part of you, which is where a lot of Black affluence miss it. Because no, Black poverty isn't part of me. what happens is in white America, they understand and are diplomatic enough to associate themselves with the quote unquote derelicts that people would condemn these insurrectionists as. Understand that they were able to do what they do because the people who sit in Senate, House of Representatives, sit in FBI, CIA, sit at the head of hedge funds, sit at the head of corporations. It is that reason that they can move in the way that they move. It's not an empowerment of them, it's an understanding that we are them. And what I ask to Black African American leaders is that, look, we don't have nothing to lose. Allow me to speak how I want to speak. People who get upset because I speak to Joe Biden and speak against the DNC. Allow me to speak. Y'all out here censoring your youth. Elders, Black elders are censoring their youth to protect quote unquote white people, liberals who have it that quote unquote work across the aisle with the insurrectionists that they so blatantly cry about. That's the issue that I have. Because in the end, what I'll say about Proud Boys, MAGA, and all those like I posted, I appreciate it. They honest, they genuine. This is the America that we live in. If you want to sum it up to this small demographic, I am sadly mistaken that is not your reality. Because when we look at the overall election as well as the Senate runoff, this country is split. And if Joe Biden didn't come out and make a campaign on $2,000 checks, which I think was very insulting, because it should have been more, at least $2,000 a month. But because he did that, he was able to skate past a win, just like he did Donald Trump. Because if he did what was necessary, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. But the problem is in America is that you can yada, 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 African Americans save the country, but you can't run on African American issues. And that's the fucking problem. I'm not saying that nobody issues don't matter outside of African Americans, but it is very, very, very pivotal that people in all races, including poor whites, get exploited through African Americans. ADOS community. But everybody's pushing back on us. And you know me. You know what I say to that. Please push back. Because your families, your mothers, your sisters, your brothers, your aunties, your cousins is going to be devoured in the process. I'm going to go ahead and before we go into the article in and around, again, phony coalitions, I'm going to just go ahead and bring up something that came out in Bloomberg as it relates to white American wealth this week. And so, you know, because I'm a nigga, y'all don't listen to me. Economics, white American wealth hits record high on pandemic stock surge. Everybody loves stocks right now. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg, the same man who ran or threw his hat in the Democratic convention. The net worth of white Americans hit a record high last year, driven by a stock market rebound that defied the pandemic, while other ethnic groups saw their share of the nation's wealth decline, according to recently released data from the Federal Reserve, not Devon. Wealth held by white households rose to $98.6 trillion. That little 1 trillion ain't shit. In third quarter of 2020, the amounts, or that amount, 84.6% of the total, the biggest share in 3 years. By contrast, portion of overall wealth held by Black Americans fell to 3.8%, down from 4.4% years earlier, while for Hispanic Americans, it dropped 2.1%. And here we have some charts below. As we see, 2006, we take a nice little dip. We come back up in these mid years, 2014 to 2020. And now we're back. As we jump down. The shift was largely driven by stock markets. White households almost own 90% of corporate equities and mutual funds, which posted a $2 trillion jump in value during the third quarter. Meanwhile, assets held by other groups prove more vulnerable to the coronavirus slump. Wealth held by Hispanic households in the form of a business ownership, for example, slumped by almost 1/4 from a year earlier to 188 billion, which is the lowest since 2013. Now, Hispanic white people account for 60% of the US population. That figure has been declining, and longer term, one reason why the white share of national wealth has dropped from 92% in 2000. White Americans are also older on average than other groups, meaning they have had more time to accumulate wealth. And while I'm going to the next article, to just jump us into the next segment, if you want to go ahead and
yeah, because I got a lot to say.
Go ahead.
We need to move away from this white black shit. So I'm done with it. Because when you get in the black community, everyone think they capital. I tell you, they what the mark of the beast. The guy was six figures, 6-pack, and 6 feet. Keep saying white undermines the black people who play into the capitalistic system, who wear, as Franz Fanon put, black skin, white masks. So I like to think about the French sociologist after network theory, because when we say white, we also got to include Northern Africans. When we say white, we also got to include Arabs and Lebanese. And so that's one of the reasons that a lot of South Asians who are growing inside the political demographic, and what you see how Kamala Harris had to play that identity line, we have to see where this capital really is going so we can break down, as Val was talking about, the access to capital. Because that's when you see that the coronavirus really shows you that divide that is inside of our red line, now digitally red line cities. Ooh. It shows you that divide within our rural area infrastructure versus our city infrastructure. It shows you where we're overdeveloped and we're underdeveloped. So it's like when we start looking at this capital and we start seeing how households are basically taking home corporate debt, and who has access to corporate debt and corporate buybacks, we have to really reassess if we're getting $1,400 on top of the $600. If we're getting that money, if that money does come, who is it really benefiting? Because even with the helping with the back rent for, again, I said it the last time, when you help with the back rent, that's the deal between the state and the landlord, not the state and the renters, because we also have a housing crisis. So when we talk about these things, it gets really difficult to get coalitions, and we know we got the Phony coalitions, hashtag Frostwad, I didn't come up with it, hashtag Blue Manga. When we get to corporatism versus actually structuring our taxes, our tax reform to reflect who's getting what, it gets lost in this intersectional soup. And that's why when you read off that article, I start thinking about, okay, are we talking about like people who are kind of white passing, especially when you talk about colorism and how colorism takes effect inside of corporatism? Or are we talking about white as in they've had capital and they have access to capital and they have access to capital gains that comes from the capital gains? It shows where the financial market or the financial economy is way ahead of the real economy in America. Or another way to say this, what I'm hearing is Wall Street is writing a policy for Main Street, but Wall Street is writing at the pace that Wall Street moves and not the way Main Street moves.
So I'll say yes. Yes. And if you are joining us right now, if you are tuning in right now, if you can, if you like it, if you can share it, if you can comment, because after we get into this, after we go through everything, we gonna speak to the people, because I want to hear everybody else's comments. My comments are, I've lived in my comments. But to answer your question, concern, we gonna get into the New York Times, and we gonna share this article up here for everybody to see. On my Instagram views, you cannot see. If you want to go over, you can hop on YouTube, you can hop on Facebook, the Corolla Scene, or under at Gilded Sages, and you can see all of the articles that we are using to undergird what we doing. So, nope. Here we go. New York Times, the COVID-19 relief fund was only for Black residents, then came lawsuits. And to preface this, we want to talk about coalitions. I'll have my comments throughout. And once we get done, we're going to touch on my housemates. So, Oregon earmarked $62 million, especially benefit Black individuals and business owners. Now, some of the money is in limbo after lawsuits alleging discrimination. After convening several meetings, the civic leaders proposed a bold, novel solution that state lawmakers approved in July. The state would earmark $62 million of its $1.4 billion in federal COVID-19 relief money to provide grants to Black residents, business owners, and community organizations enduring pandemic-related hardships. You know, it was fine being honest. This is who needs this right support now, said Lou Frederick, a state senator who is Black. But now, millions of dollars in grants are on hold after one Mexican American and two white business owners sued the state, arguing that the fund for Black residents discriminated against them. What I'll say quickly in between that is that the sad state that we are in America is that people are willing to go against ADOS. People are willing to go against African Americans, Black Americans, AKA whatever you want to call it, those of us who were enslaved by America, exploited through capital, exploited through, again, the same treachery that Native Americans, quote unquote, Indian Americans have had. And yet we still face pushback. It's such a crazy thing. The dispute in Oregon is the latest legal skirmish in the nation's decade-long battle over affirmative action, and comes in a year in which the pandemic has starkly exposed the socioeconomic and health disparities that African Americans face. Yes, because Asian Americans have also pit themselves against affirmative action.
What's her man name? He did the Drain on Netflix. Hassan?
The Patriot Act.
Yeah, the Patriot Act. He talked about that.
Yeah,
Gotcha,
it's straight up disrespectful. Nobody, if you are opposing ADOS, if you are opposing African Americans as it relates to what they are owed under the soul.
But there was a South Asian senator that came out and spoke in favor of African Americans $1 million, wasn't it?
Absolutely. But
Okay.
the problem is that I need everybody to understand that you are racist if you disagree. Since we on the page that we on, if you disagree with reparations for African Americans, ADOS, Black people, as it pertains to Black codes, you're a racist, point blank, period.
For denying, are you saying, I get the point that you're racist for being dismissive. It's the same thing as being a Holocaust denier. But what I'm getting to, you're saying racist because it's empirical proof.
Empirical proof.
Okay, so the racism comes like, this is empirical proof. It's like, this is the character judgment is that you're willing to ignore the empirical fact to prove your bias.
Absolutely. Over the decades, various remedies to address discrimination have been met with legal challenges. Supreme Court rulings have been established that race-based policies are constitutional only if they achieve a compelling governmental interest and are narrowly tailored to do so. The court has most notably allowed race to be used as a factor in college admission to achieve diversity, but court in recent decades has also sided against one of the most original rationales for affirmative action policies to undo past discrimination and its lingering effect. I highlighted a lot, probably almost all of this article because it's so atrocious. It's so atrocious. With Congress having recently extended the deadline to the end of this year for states to spend the CARES Act funds or return what litigation could mean the money is lost for good. That means that because you have one Mexican and two white people who want to be entitled, and no Mexican community, no Latino community to check this one little Mexican Negro.
You call him a Mexican Negro. It's funny how you call him a Mexican Negro because it's like, this is what Black people do to Black people. That's funny. You call him a
Mexican Negro.
You call him a Mexican Negro.
You're fucking up the money. And I'll say this, if you are Mexican, you better check him because he's standing for your whole group. If nobody checks him and this lawsuit passes, the whole group is accountable.
So you're saying that they should be held accountable the same way that quote unquote insurrectionists be held accountable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Oregon's long history of anti-Black racism has fueled much of the advocacy for the state's fund. And while other racial groups have said that they supported it, critics have argued that Black people are not the only ones who have faced discrimination in this state. We are not arguing that people don't face discrimination, but we are saying is that yes, we've experienced a different, very nuanced, very long-term discrimination. That's all that we're saying. But white people and Mexicans and their allies apparently can't understand that. I don't know why, and somehow. Some Black residents who make up about 2% of the state's population, 2% of the state's population, just two, said the argument was a distraction. But as we move down, Edward Blum, a white conservative activist whose organization Protect on Fair Representation is underwriting one of two lawsuits challenging the fund, said the opposition was about preventing racial exclusion. It's like the employment arena. Going to apply for a job and seeing a sign on the employment office that reads, "No Asians need apply." Mr. Blum, who has led efforts to challenge race-based admissions policies at universities, including a high-profile case against Harvard. Your race and your ethnicity should not be used to help you or harm you in your life's endeavors. Before I continue on, my race and my ethnicity has harmed me my whole life, as well as everybody in this room. Whether I don't care if you want to acknowledge it or not, your race and your ethnicity harms you when you're in America. I don't know if Donald Trump is going to make you realize that. I don't know if Mitch McConnell is going to make you realize that. I don't know if these corporate institutions are going to make you realize that. But look, black is nigga. Brown is just like a little bit above. But when black gets removed, brown becomes the nigger. So, as I move on, Walter later, a plaintiff in one of the lawsuits said he might be on the verge of laying off employees from Dynamic Service Fire and Security, the small electric services company he started in Salem in 2007 if he did not receive relief money soon. An area alone, about $20,000 from the federal paycheck PPP program, which everybody's familiar with, paycheck protection program, he said was just enough to cover payroll in about 2 months. Mr. Leja, who was 64 and white, said he could not say whether historic discrimination for black business owners at a disadvantage. But a particular fund, he said, was not warranted. It's discriminatory, he said. It's locking up a bunch of funds that can only be used by black businesses when there's a ton of other businesses out there that need access to those funds. It's not a white or black thing. It's an everybody thing. All lives matter. Hashtag. Many of today's economic and health disparities stem from past policies and practices that were explicitly racist. Some social scientists say, arguing that measures aimed at particular races were necessary to undo damage. But courts have set a high bar for allowing the clear use of race in legislation. To get around zip codes, socioeconomic status, when designing measures that they hope will benefit the marginalized racial groups. Yes, that doesn't work. That's basically telling you that all these class-based policies, when you talk about using the zip code, because again, if we're using the zip code in 2021, you must understand that the zip codes that we're taking advantage of were already extracted from. And the reason that we're here is because, again, when we talk about gentrification, we talk about the idea that white counterparts can't live against their wealthy black counterparts. So what happens is you have to find the next bottom and lower thing, which is always happen. And it's just going to continue to go on repeat, on repeat, on repeat, on repeat. So a zip code raceless-based policy is not going to help the situation, because guess what? The people who are within the zip codes now, today, are in large part the people who exile themselves, quote unquote, white flight, black flight, because both flee from black poverty, fled, my apologies, from black poverty. They now have to come back into it.
Come back into the room. Because, yeah, bring us back into the room.
Yep.
Because that'll be too much information from the article, because what you're getting into is that it's a timeline. And this is what I was kind of alluding to earlier. You must establish a timeline when you're talking policy and not use policy as contemporary terms. Because you must establish, like the article's done. What I mean by that is that if we continue with this article, we'll be pigeonholed into this argument. Like, there is a link in the description. Like, I want them to see me. like unshare because I want them to see me. Thank you. No, seriously. People do not have the attention span for the article. There is a link in the description that talks about the video of Oregon. When we're talking about these discussions, stop assuming you know. Contemporary issues are issues of the past. William Faulkner said the past is the past really of the past. And why William Faulkner matters is that Toni Morrison did her dissertation on William Faulkner, talking about the poverty in America. More importantly, who is now talking about reparations for Black people? Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates is who? A protege of Toni Morrison. And this is why I say bring it back into the room. There has to be a curriculum change, a pedagogy change in America if we really want to resolve these issues. Because to your point, the zoning, the projects, the color law, the projects were initially for white middle class people who couldn't afford housing. And they removed the African American slums. So what I'm getting into is that, the reason I was like, it's enough is because when you were talking about ADOS, again, most people don't know what that means. It's an establishment of a timeline outside of just a political ideology. It's a whole way of thinking about Blackness and amongst the complexity of Blackness, because Oregon was started as a white utopia. If you look at the video, you will see it started as a white utopia. And so what I'm getting into is that we also need to talk about passing. We got to talk about how just because you are technically white doesn't necessarily mean that you are white as in WASP. Because white Anglo-Saxon Protestant matters because you have Southern Italians who are not necessarily fair, who are darker. So when we start talking about the color line, that's why I came into the room, was like, I can't take any more of it, because when this white-black divide is so minute that anyone who tries to attack the Black is like, why are you attacking the Black? That's why I'm confused as like, what do they really have against this front outside of the typical argument of race-based policy is not fair because it's advantaging one group, whereas we know racially blind policy also excludes people. Because right now, if we say that we want to exclude women or we want to exclude any policy that talks about women, that would be seen as sexist and would be seen as misogynist. Am I right or am I wrong? Am I reading the world right? Okay. So my thing is, if we are targeting, and this is a part of intersectionality, if targeting universalism, if we are targeting policies that historically disenfranchise people, we have hub zones, historically underused business zones, historically underutilized business zones that help businesses that hire people from here with grant money. If we allow grant money to be used for people who hire returning citizens, we know that the people ahead of these things are not necessarily Black people. We know that most Black businesses are undercapitalized. That's why they don't grow. We know that there is not necessarily a pipeline issue. It's just that people have a lot of, they don't have no outlet. They got the plug with no outlet from the Breaking Brown family. If there is an issue, then where's the NAACP for the people in Oregon, for the Black people in Oregon? Because that is part of their job, to fight for these causes. Just like justify, like, no, because why I'm so vehement right now is that you have a government, right? We're arguing for government intervention, right? Mm-hmm. You have a government that says, we're willing to acknowledge that this happened. But how does a government implement a policy that they want implemented if you have private citizens willing to stop it? How do you hold your government accountable if your neighbor is willing to tell you, I don't want you to have this because it excludes me, but they are more than willing to exclude you? Most of the problem we have is that the legacy of segregation in America has diminished our social capital, placed differently. Because motherfuckers don't know each other, they arguing for no reason. It's like, oh my God, when I saw that happen the other day, I was like, poor people fighting poor people because they want their master to win.
This is facts.
Yeah.
So this is where I'm it's like
the capital.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Capitol. It's like, son, why aren't people freaked out? Because I'm right, they're insurrectionists, they this. It's like, why aren't you freaked out that somebody is supposed to be better than you? Because they had what Paul Mooney says, the complexion for the protection. Someone that's supposed to be economically better off than you is so frustrated because they've been economically excluded that they literally set fire on the stairs of the Capitol. We are no longer in the American century. We got China that we got to worry about. You know me, I'm geopolitical. If we're not focused on America, in America, no one else has to care. That's why I'm baffled about that article. It's like, why are they fighting back? If we can return to it now, but it's like, why are they fighting back against people getting funding?
You don't know.
I'm baffled. You lost me. You lost me, man.
A lot of it is because a lot of people don't necessarily want to see African Americans, ADOS win, and they don't understand that the recorrection of that is beneficial to them because unfortunately they are here to be exploited in a lot of ways. Because like you said, what happens is that labor, that respect doesn't necessarily translate. Because it's like, I know your situation, I know where you come from, I understand what you have to go through to get to where it is that you are. So I know I can take advantage. And the way that the American corporations are set up at this point is that, look, you can kind of do whatever you want. You have 56 new billionaires, along with the billionaires that already existed, increasing their wealth by at least 400 million. And then on top of that, in contrast to that, 8 million people drop into abject poverty.
The ratios is what's throwing me off. It's like I call it T-ball. I mean, not T-ball, but it's golf ball. You got this golf ball that's of people who have this ballooned asset wealth that isn't really monetary wealth because you can't necessarily sell off these equities because that's a fire sale. But they have most of the control of things, and policy is dictated to maintain those portfolios. But then you have this T that's most of everyone else that's supporting wherever that top 1% wants to go. However they want to hit themselves from the T, however they want to go down a fair lane, they go down the lane, but we left on top of the goddamn at the top, at the beginning. No one cares about the T. No one cares where the T lands. Everyone cares where the 1% lands. They're the ones that need to go to the hole under par. They're the ones that don't need to go bogey or broke. They're the ones that they want to go arbitrage. They want to sail into the future. But it's okay if the poor go bogey, triple bogey, or should I say in debt and triple debt. So this is why the Oregon isn't making sense when you have a state that's doing what we're advocating for, but you have private citizens that's telling the state, like, no, you gotta hold up. Hold on, Slim. We want something first.
Here, and I'm about to just go ahead and bring the screen back up for you. And, you know, just to get down into it. And I'm just going to go ahead and read. This one says that we understand that for no other reason than the color of your skin, you have been restricted and prohibited from accessing the tools and economically mobilized, she said. For that reason, we're not going to create any veiled language. We as a Black community are tired of that. And I second that sentiment. I'm not about to veil the language to do class action policy. Supporters of the fund argued that 62 million accounted for about 4.5% of what the state received, leaving plenty for residents who are not Black. The state's Black population ballooned in the 1940s as many Southerners migrated west for jobs in wartime industries. Like in many other parts of the country, the new Black settlers in Oregon were restricted to certain areas. In 1990, 80% of that state's Black population was confined to 2 zip codes. And when you hear confined to 2 zip codes, I want people to think of redlining, because that's what that is. You stuck within a particular pocket, an economic pocket. Northeast Portland, according to Stephen Green, and Portland native and former banker. Banks and other investors largely avoided doing business in those communities. Residents who were also displaced when parts of those neighborhoods were raised at different times to build a highway, a sports arena, and hospital. That history robbed many African Americans of opportunities to build wealth. Historians say a legacy that continues. The racial wealth gap in Multnomah County, which includes Portland, is larger now than it was 40 years ago, with Black residents holding fewer assets than other racial groups. In 2019, Oregonians received 4 of the 984 loans the Small Business Administration issued statewide, according to the Portland Business Journal. We chopped down a little bit. That means talking to Black residents for the relief, because other efforts to address inequality have failed, said Janelle Bynum, a state's representative who is Black. Without the intentionality, without them actually caring that the money flows through our communities, they'll never have to do anything to change the status quo, she said. I'm not okay with that. And with that being said, I want to say I completely agree in the sense that we can't continue to do class-based policies and very vague policies as it pertains to our community specifically, in the overall community when we talk about POC. Because I don't think what a lot of people understand is that when you talk about the POC community, is that a lot of the times you get exploited through the African American community. And what I mean by that is when you talk about, and when you look at back at Black codes, and when you look at Reconstruction era, or the Reconstruction that didn't happen, you see where there isn't a willingness or political willingness to do what's right, because even still now to this day it's viewed as political suicide to advocate specifically for African Americans, or quote unquote the ADOS community. And that's by people who are far left, as Bernie Sanders and AOC, as well as centrists, where you get Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden. I think that creates an issue, not only for ourselves, but for the people who wish to achieve quote unquote freedom. As you've heard me say all of the time, is that when we talk about sanctuary cities are going to be the new ghettos. Because while you're acquiescing to Joe Biden or capitulating to the establishment of America, you must understand that while you are doing that, the people who you come behind and that you build on top of are also not being respected. As we saw Joe Biden video, audio footage.
Buying tapes.
Absolutely. Check out the video. We saw that. They don't have any inkling or any willingness or any want to do what's right by slaves. Because we still are slaves in that sense. In that you have to play a game. If you think that you're going to come on top of that and do anything different, sorry you're confused. But I would just like to hear your thoughts because you spoke.
I jumped in, bro.
I was about to say, you spoke to what it was, but
I get you, but I had to jump in. You know, we talked about the format, but I can't hold it no more. Because I'm trying to phrase it in the best way I can phrase it. There's a point that I have reached in which I am frustrated with the average person not understanding that capital moves as capital. And if you want to play into identity politics, if you want to play into what is believed that, oh, I am from this group, or ethnocentrism, if you want to play, well, I'm a man, so I'm exceptional. I'm a woman, I'm exceptional. If you want to play into those things, then what you lose out is talent. What you lose out is passion. What you lose out is dedication, because everyone is chasing check, right? This is what I'm hearing. It's like, oh, this 4.2% that's going towards this one demographic, I want a piece of that pie too. It's like, okay, then that makes me understand why the IRS wants to audit small business so they can see and fine tune what small business really means. Because I'm vexed, meaning I'm confused and frustrated. And the source of the confusion, again, is if you are seeing that representatives may have multiple identities, but are willing to ideologically go for one thing, then you must begin to understand that the political economy is coming from those who can donate so that the politician has a career. Because nowadays, what politicians do, what did Barack do? He sold books, got put on Front Street by Frontline, like, why aren't you doing policy for Black people? When PBS asks you, why aren't you doing policy for Black people? You got to kind of ask yourself, what are they paying attention to? Because what I'm frustrated with is that we act like in America there isn't a history of white people and Black people both fighting for the reconciliation of the economic structure in America, so that we don't have to necessarily exploit people. We can actually empower people so that we can have an innovation engine that keeps going. John Brown, it's like, you don't have to be Malcolm X. You don't have to be Nat Turner if you're non-Black. There are white people who have been revolutionary and have decided, you know what, this doesn't fit me. You don't have to act like me, or you don't have to act Black to be part of Black liberation. And that's what happens with the Democratic base, and why the Democratic base falters all the time, because you got the social justice Democrats, the establishment Democrats. How can a fractured party that remains fractured go against a party that has one thing on the mind, the bottom line, the GOP? So when I ingest that article and I digest that article, I digest a lot of frustration in the sense of, if we have government and people in government that are doing very effective policy and not being greedy with the policy, what hinders us as private citizens from saying, you know what, using the intersectionality that we've been talking about under the 8 years of Obama and the next 4 years of Obama, because Obama's Biden and Harris office is basically Obama's last office. if we're going to be on this again, let's use the language of intersectionality. Let's use the scholar, a legal scholar of intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw's target universalism. Use the history, because we need civics. Use the history of the economic engine of America. Move away from this larger economics to this behavioral economics, which is basically sociology, to understand that the formation of our neighborhoods is also the history of the people who formed them. And then the segregation legacy has made it so that we cannot see who is in the same predicament we are because our poverty looks a little different.
So what we're gonna do from here is, because I realized
I was on my soapbox.
No, you on your soapbox, but I dig it, and the conversation is already dense in that way. But I would like to address some comments in it because it says, and should we dignify them both by giving our attention and illustration? But it says, and also preach. Speaking fact, did you want to speak to?
Who's that?
I'm not necessarily sure, but if you wanted to speak to, and should we dignify them by giving them our attention and frustration? And what I would say is,
Go ahead.
before, is that absolutely, I'm going to dig into that ass. It's a lot of positions that I'm going to take coming up based on the fact that I have proximity to you and I have leverage within the institutions that you build as a microcosm. And I'm going to speak as loud as possible. And the only way my voice matters is that people will get behind it. So,
okay, so in the comments, I posed a question. It asks, do you believe a person is racist for dismissing the reparations argument? And we had a few answers I wanted to just put out there. So Zimba G says, yes, I believe a person is racist if they say no to reparations, and I get how people might think unlikely though. Then we have Leslie Horton that says, I wouldn't say a person is racist for dismissing reparations, but I would say they are self-absorbed and possibly lack empathy.
I'm on my Trump shit. They racist.
Indeed. But the answer to the question, your attention, you have to. This is what I'm really on my soapbox about. You are not rich enough to afford your prejudice. To be rich is to afford to pay someone else to deal with the things you don't want to deal with. So yes, you got to give your attention to people you don't like. That's community. That's family. Let's not pretend like we don't go home sometimes on the holidays. Like, I got to deal with this. All right. On to the thing about the racist thing. The problem I have is that people think that racism is racial epithets. It's not. Racism is policy and ignoring people from policy and excluding people from policy. So that's where calling people, here's the thing. I don't think individuals possess the power to be racist. Individual institutions can be racist because to be racist is a very powerful thing. Now, can people reinforce that racist ideology in the institution? Absolutely. And as far as reparations, that's a split thing because I go to Reconstruction because with Reconstruction, it also took in consideration the poor white population because as we were being exploited economically at the same time because of the time fracture, you got the urban rural divide is the Reconstruction of America.
Yeah, and then not only that, it's just also the miseducation of it. Because like you said, once we actually commit to the idea of being able to teach a different story, teach a different narrative, and be able to live a different narrative without the quote unquote play the game narrative behind it in terms of whether it be cutting your hair, whether it be trying to bleach your skin, or whether it be trying to dress a certain way.
When that talk like you're Southern.
It's so many different things that go into it.
Can I get one more? So someone it's into KT's, hope I'm pronouncing it right.
Yep.
She also said in response to that question, I don't think that they are racist for rejecting it because my healing isn't dependent on an external force. Reparations would be nice, but I'm past expecting and waiting on that. For my own sanity, I have to see the solution coming from my community, not from the oppressor trying to make amends.
So what I will respond to that is, as a community organizer, as a person who's been appointed twice, as a person who works in community organizations, I would say that yes, you can feel that way, but in the totality of it, you have to accept that you have been casted in a particular manner, in a particular way to fulfill a particular outcome in a capitalistic society that was built on top of Black codes, which is the first policy as it relates to slavery, which undergirds everything that comes after it. I don't necessarily, have an issue with people believing in anything they believe. But what I would love to say is that you can't reject it, is that you have to push for it. Part of the reason that America takes polls as it relates to reparations is because they understand the psyche of Black Americans and that they know that Black Americans in most part will push against it more than any other demographic because they, Black Americans being, respond to the consciousness of whiteness, which is why we have Joe Biden as the president-elect soon to be sworn in, because Joe Biden was the quote-unquote most close thing to what we understood to be liberal white racism in America. And so I don't think that that is the ideology to move on, because what it comes down to is pressing people to get what they want. Nobody gets what they want in America, except white people, because whiteness is the exception. Whiteness was built on exception. And again, that's where we get it twisted, where everybody gets into, especially Bernie Sanders, the fake white hope, gets into this class-based policy, which again, I don't necessarily disagree with in all the way around, but when you have the audacity to speak on class-based policy and speak on class within America and devoid yourself of race without acknowledging that race was the first policy within America. Again, going back to Black codes, race was the first policy. It was not class. Within and amongst classes, which is why you see the insurrection and the tomfoolery and the nincompooplery from your quote unquote white trash or whatever you want to deem them as. The reason that you see that is because even when we come up to the Civil War, and even when we come up to instances where we are able as Black people to see the light, white people in America, WASP, as you say, white American,
White Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, make a point to keep that intact. So Reconstruction, instead of being 40 acres and a mule, was a deal between, and which we'll drop in the drop down, was a deal between, I'm gonna pay you for your slaves. I'm gonna pay you for your motherfucking slaves. I'm gonna pay you for them. you some wealth. And I'm gonna let you build and stack. And this is why I love the insurrection that happened on Capitol Hill to this day. I wish it would have went further.
Man.
Because again, for comments like that, I wish it would have went further because I don't think people understand that these are the same niggas.
It's a family reunion. It's a family reunion.
One of the dudes was a son of a Supreme Court judge. Like, I mean, not a Supreme Court judge. State. I'm sorry.
You're fine. I want to get to the other comments because that's an offline joint for real. Because I don't want to incite nothing, and we've seen this inciting anything.
I'm not inciting anything, but at the same time, America is America. I'm a black man. What you going to do? Say I got power?
Nah, that's the offline though, because I don't want nobody to come and say nothing. It's like, nope, I ain't saying nothing. That's the offline. What's the next comment?
Okay, it's kind of a back and forth.
Or the people in the comments talking to each other?
Yeah.
All right, cool. The reason I say that's an offline is because, again, censorship is real. And I don't play with that. You're going to have to have real conversations with me. But that goes back to feed into it, though, you got the ballot of the bullet. Literally, if you read the ballot of the bullet, 19 is always love April because April always got something going on. April 1865, you got Frederick Douglass speaking about what the black man wants and come down to the vote, because if the black man don't have a vote, the black man don't have a voice. Then you have my man Malcolm X speaking, I think it's April 1964, about the Kennedys and how the Democratic Party uses the black vote. What I'm getting into is that if you don't know your history, then you don't know your present. If you don't know your history, you don't know your present. We can keep arguing about, well, they don't do this. It's like, why are you making people responsible? I come from a very Sterling Brown way of seeing this. If you don't know what I'm talking about Sterling A. Brown. There's one poem you can look up, Slim Greer in Hell. And what I love about Slim Greer in Hell is that Slim is this guy who's born in whatever. He dies, he goes up, St. Peter sends him down to earth again. And basically Slim comes to the conclusion that he's back in Dixie. Hell is in Dixie. And basically, Slim is told by Peter he's too dumb to be in heaven. My point is, if you value black thought that's been accepted by white imaginations, then you don't know who black people are. If you have to wait until the mainstream accepts you before you're willing to accept yourself, going back to your point, this is Toni Morrison in the Bluest Eye. If you have to wait for the mainstream to accept you, then you don't know the value you already inherently possess. And that's the problem I see with a lot of demands politically, because if you know the value you inherently possess, you're willing to do the Montgomery boycott, which took over a year. It took over a year for them to get that overturned. You can't just protest one day. Activism isn't one day. Activism is generational. So if you're not willing to uplift one generation and teach that generation, this is why you are valuable. This is what's valuable about you. Those curls that people don't like, those are your curls. That skin people don't like, that's your skin. The way you talk, the way you move, the way you think, that's you. Never love anything that's not willing to love you. And when people breach you with hatred, understand that malice is the beginning of violence. Speaking negatively on someone is the beginning of dehumanization. When you begin to dehumanize me by calling me outside my name and calling me less than, I have a right to protect myself. And that's, for me, what Malcolm means by any means necessary. If you don't fortify your mind, then you can't fight. And the fight isn't always with your hands. When you go into politics, you have to go in with, this is where I'm willing to die on. Because if I don't stop here, what's behind me is not enough. But what happens is that we get into this very Booker T. Washington in the machine, and we're going to go, let's industrialize, Let's get the money while we can. Let's chase the bag. And while we chase the bag, let's drop the ball on the next generation. Because as my experience has been, you got to do for yourself. And if you don't do for yourself, then you're not seen as valuable within the quote unquote Black community.
And just for me to cut in, my thing with the POC conversation is if you can't see the humanity in the reparations argument, then what happens when automation, which is inevitable at this point, knocks at your door? Because this is the argument. After this reparations argument, whatever comes from it, if we don't get behind it, everyone is the exploited once automation knocks at your door. So for everyone to be fighting and being opposed to these things, it's like there's nothing more human, in my opinion, than asking for the justice in which we are asking for. Like, if you can't see humanity and justice, then when it comes knocking at your door, then what can you expect when your job gets automated and you don't have a justice claim because you stomped over our justice claim? And that's what I want people of color to see, is that there's a real humanity in uniting for a justice claim, because it's not just us. There is other factors that are coming in, and just as much as it affects us, it affects everyone.
I can agree to that. Did you have something over there?
Nah, so what I said I'm gonna do is, because I like the flow of everything that's happening. Let me see, let me stop sharing. Because I was going to get into gig economy, and gig economy is a whole nother discussion. And we are definitely tipping the point of our time frame. And I want to be honest with people in terms of where we start, where we end. We started a few minutes late, and then we're going to end a few minutes late, which we at 8:45, which is cool. I don't necessarily mind. But we're going to come back. We're going to come back with the gig economy, because I don't fuck with the gig economy. Luckily enough, I'll be able to put up more articles. I'm sure enough will come out within a week's time span. But into the next episode, people got laid off. And people are being circumvented around. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to hire another person because they don't have as many protections as the other person.
So scabs and the classifications.
Very much so.
That is a whole nother episode.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode. That's why I was like, I'm looking at the time.
That's a whole nother episode.
It is what it is. Hey, I appreciate the comments. I appreciate. I don't mess with the name. You probably mess with the name.
I know. I messed my own name up though, so apologies.
And then shout out.
What was that last one?
Leslie.
I can see.
Okay.
I'm gonna hop in the comments after this, but I just wanna, if you are in here with us, if you can you like the video, share the video, and apparently y'all are commenting. I appreciate the conversation. It is what it is, and just bring people more.
Can we continue on Twitter for those who have Twitter?
Absolutely. I'm always talking on Twitter.
Yeah. So engage us at Gilded Sages, the Gilded Sages at Twitter. Engage us there. If you have Twitter with our Facebook, engage us on the Facebook, continue the comment section so we can go throughout the week. We can drop in the links and we can continue to have this ongoing conversation. as we come in and continue the momentum that we're building today. Because thank you. This is what we've been asking for, and you are delivering on that. I really appreciate everyone who's commenting because it keeps us rich, keeps us honest, and it gives us multiple perspectives as we are doing this as a community platform. We're mostly just moderators at this point until the vid leaves, then we can see each other in person.
And what's your personal Twitter?
My personal
Outside of the
Twitter is the letter I, underscore Q202. That's it. IQ202.
And on the Black Halo on everything.
We out of here.